I was standing in the hallway of St. Mary's Hospital when the doctor called my name. "Mrs. Hart," he said quietly, holding a sheet of paper between his fingers. "Your daughter's blood pressure is dropping. She needs an emergency transfusion. The only match we found is you." For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of the fluorescent lights and the hiss of the oxygen tank behind him. The sound reminded me of the nights I used to work double shifts here. The same walls, the same smell of disinfectant and metal. Only this time, I wasn't the nurse saving someone's child. I was the mother being asked to save my own. Through the glass panel of the ICU, I saw Amber lying there, my only daughter, pale, motionless, a tangle of tubes and bruises. The last time I saw her face was 3 years ago, when she slammed the door of my house and shouted, "I don't need you anymore." Now she was unconscious, and they were asking if I would give her my blood. "Mrs. Hart," the doctor repeated, softer, as if afraid I might break. "Will you donate?" I looked at the thin red line pulsing across the monitor. Her heart still fighting, stubborn like mine once was. My hands trembled slightly. Not from fear. From memory. "I already gave her everything," I said, my voice calm and almost gentle. "Today, no more." The doctor blinked, unsure if he'd heard me right. Behind him, a young nurse turned, eyes wide. "But she's your daughter." I met her gaze. "I used to be her mother," I said. "Now I'm just someone who remembers exactly what it felt like to be thrown away." No one spoke. The only sound left was the steady beep of the monitor, life hanging by a thread. I took the paper from the doctor's hand. My name, my blood type, my signature from years of hospital forms, all still the same. I folded it neatly and handed it back. Outside, the late afternoon sun bled through the window, staining the floor a deep, raw red. It looked almost like spilled blood, hers, mine, everyone's. And for the first time, I didn't move to clean it up. I turned away from the glass. My reflection flashed briefly on the metal door. Older, colder, but finally steady. "I forgive her," I whispered, mostly to myself. "But I don't forget." The nurse's gloves squeaked against the glass as she closed the curtain. Behind it, the monitor kept beeping, slow and stubborn, like a memory that refused to die. That was the moment I realized forgiveness isn't always mercy. Sometimes, it's just the end of bleeding. People think a single moment breaks you, but it's never just one. It's years of tiny cuts, each one deeper than the last. When the doctor asked me to give blood that day, all those cuts opened at once. For 20 years, I raised Amber alone. Her father left when she was 3. No note, just a folded payslip on the kitchen counter and the words, "I'll send money when I can," scribbled in pencil. He never did. I was 39, a nurse in the emergency ward. Night after night, I stitched up strangers, changed IVs, wiped fevers off foreheads that weren't my child's. I kept a metal nurse's kit under my bed, a dented silver box with gauze, old bandage scissors, and a hidden compartment for cash. Every payday, after taxes and rent, I'd slide what was left into that box. Some months it was only $10. Some months nothing at all. But over the years, it became the secret reservoir that kept Amber's world from drying up. I remember the smells from those nights. Iodine, burnt coffee, sweat on my scrubs. My feet would ache so badly, I'd take my shoes off on the bus ride home. But when I opened our apartment door and saw Amber asleep at the kitchen table with her school books, I'd tell myself it was worth it. Always worth it. She wanted to be an architect. I paid for art classes, for software, for trips to visit campuses. I skipped dentist appointments. I cut my own hair. One winter I went 3 weeks with a broken heater because tuition was due, but Amber never knew. That was the point. She wouldn't have to know. The kit under my bed became my quiet ritual. Every night I'd open it, run my finger along the cool edge of the scissors, and count the bills. Sometimes I left a note to myself under the cash. Hold on. 2 more years. By the time she graduated, the kit was almost empty. But Amber was standing in her cap and gown, smiling at me in the crowd. She sent me a text after the ceremony. "Thanks, Mom, you're the best." Just 4 words. but I kept it saved on my phone for years, like a bandage I could press over my own exhaustion. When she married, I wanted to give her something that wasn't just money. I chose a silver bracelet with 2 tiny words engraved inside. Stay safe. It cost me a month's overtime. I slipped it onto her wrist at the wedding reception. She kissed my cheek and said, "You shouldn't have spent so much." I laughed, told her, "I've been saving for this moment my whole life." And in a way, I had. 3 months later, the locks on her house changed. I came by on a Sunday with a bag of groceries. The key didn't fit. My calls went to voicemail. Finally, a text arrived. I need my own space. Please don't come by unannounced anymore. Space. As if the last 20 years had been a kind of intrusion. As if the double shifts, the missed meals, the silent saving had all been too close, too heavy. I remember standing on her porch with the grocery bag sagging in my arms. A carton of milk burst at the bottom and leaked onto my shoes. Inside the house, through the blinds, I could see my silver bracelet glinting on her wrist as she walked past without opening the door. "Your own space?" I whispered to myself. "What do you call the nights I slept in a hospital corridor so you could have your own room?" I drove home with the groceries on the passenger seat, the milk smell turning sour in the heat. The kit under my bed felt heavier that night, though there was barely anything left inside. The words she'd said, or maybe hadn't said, started to echo. Little things she'd thrown out over the years. Like the time I overheard her on the phone with a friend, "My mom's good at bleeding for other people. She just doesn't know how to stop bleeding herself." She didn't know I was standing in the hallway, listening. That sentence lodged somewhere deep inside me, a splinter I couldn't pull out. For weeks afterward, every time I wrapped a bandage around a patient's arm, I heard it again, bleeding for other people, never stopping. It became a prophecy I didn't want to believe. I kept sending small amounts to her bank account, telling myself it was just until she and Dean, her new husband, got on their feet. But the transfers were automatic, like transfusions I couldn't shut off. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, check my balance, and feel a hollow ache in my chest. Sometimes I'd pick up the bracelet box from my dresser, run my thumb over the empty slot where it had sat before the wedding. The engraving still clear in my mind. Stay safe. Only now it felt less like a blessing and more like a command I'd forgotten to give myself. The years blurred. Holidays came and went. My coworkers retired, remarried, moved away. I stayed. Night shifts, overtime, the same hospital corridors. I tried to fill my days with small joys. A used paperback, a walk around the block, a new set of bandage scissors. But everything felt like holding pressure on a wound that wouldn't close. And then, out of nowhere, there'd be a text from Amber. "Can you help with rent?" Or, "Dean's between jobs. Could you spot us this month?" Each one a little needle, each one drawing a little more from me. I always said yes. I always found a way, until the day I didn't. Looking back, I can see the pattern. The kit under my bed wasn't just for money. It was a metaphor for me. Always full of something meant for someone else, never refilled. I had spent decades as a walking first aid kit, patching, transfusing, keeping others alive while ignoring my own slow bleed. The last time I opened it before everything changed, there was nothing inside but a single strip of gauze. I held it up to the light. It looked like a surrender flag. Or a warning. That was the night I dreamed of the hospital monitor flatlining. Not Amber's. Mine. When the phone rang months later and the doctor said, "She needs your blood," I felt that splinter in my chest shift. All the nights, all the money, all the unasked for space condensed into one choice: eat again or stop. I'd always thought forgiveness meant opening a vein forever. I didn't know it could also mean closing one. I was 30, the year the hospital started calling me the night shift ghost. I lived on black coffee, vending machine crackers, and the sound of monitors. Amber was 6 then. All knees and questions, waiting for me at a neighbor's apartment while I ran from one trauma bay to the next. One night, close to dawn, we brought in a little boy hit by a car. Glassed capes. He was about Amber's age. He clung to my wrist as I changed his IV, eyes wide and terrified. "Mom?" he whispered, half awake, half bleeding. "Any?" For a second I froze. His hand was so small, sticky with blood and fear. I leaned close, pressed a gauze pad to his arm and said softly, "You're safe now." He smiled, then drifted off under the morphine. When I stepped out of the room, I couldn't stop shaking. Under the fluorescent lights, my reflection in the glass looked pale, older than 30. That was the night I made myself a promise. My own child would never have to call anyone else Mom. Whatever it took, I'd be there. Even if it meant sleeping 2 hours a day and living on hope. The next morning, I went home to our tiny apartment on Elm Street. Amber was still asleep on the couch, hair sticking to her forehead. On the table were her crayons and a doll with a paper towel taped around its arm. In big wobbly letters, she had written, "Bang It," by Dr. Carr. Amber. I laughed until my chest hurt. When she woke up, I asked, "What happened to your doll?" "She fell off the bed," she said seriously, holding up a strip of medical tape. I fixed her. "So you're the doctor now?" I teased. She shook her head. "No. I want to be a nurse like you. Nurses fix people for real." Her words hit me deeper than she could imagine. I knelt down, helped her tighten the little bandage, and said, "Then remember this, sweetheart. Always bandage the wound, not the heart. If you wrap the wrong place, the pain stays inside." She nodded solemnly, the way only children do when they don't fully understand but want to please you anyway. Years passed, but that moment clung to me like the smell of antiseptic on my scrubs. Every time I opened my nurse's kit at work, that dented silver box with the faint rust stain on the latch, I saw Amber's tiny hands wrapping her doll's wrist. The box became my diary without words. Every coin I slipped inside carried the same thought. Stay safe, stay safe, stay safe. Back then, safe meant having enough food, enough rent, enough light to read by. It never occurred to me that emotional safety could be harder to buy. Some nights, when the ward was quiet, I'd close my eyes and hear her humming to herself at home, pretending to heal her toys. I'd picture her waiting for me to come back, tiny fingers smelling of glue and soap, and I'd push through the exhaustion. It didn't matter that my spine ached or my eyes burned. The image of her doll with the crooked bandage kept me standing. There was one Christmas I'll never forget. Snow had shut down half the city. I was scheduled for a double shift, but Amber wanted to see the lights downtown. I couldn't promise both. So I made a deal. We'd decorate the hospital instead. She came in wearing my spare ID badge, waving it like a medal. While I checked on patients, she stuck red ribbons on IV poles and whispered wishes to anyone awake enough to listen. When she reached an old man with a broken hip, she offered him a candy cane and said, "My mom can fix anything." He laughed. I almost cried. That night, the staff started calling her Little Nurse Heart. It's strange. Back then, every exhaustion felt noble. I thought love and sacrifice were the same thing. Maybe they were, for a while. Years later, when people asked why I stayed in the ER so long, I never told them the truth. It wasn't duty. It was training. Practice in patching others so I could keep patching her life together. Every bandage I wrapped on a stranger felt like rehearsal for her future. That's why the memory of that small, blood-smudged hand, the boy who called me Mom, never left. He'd been the spark, the one that turned duty into obsession. And that's why, when the doctor said Amber needed my blood, the flash that went through me wasn't fear or anger. It was that night replayed in my head. A child's voice calling, "Mom," and me realizing that love can't always be a transfusion. Sometimes, it has to stop the bleeding. The year after Amber's wedding, our conversations began shrinking. First to a few texts, then to polite check-ins that felt rehearsed. I still sent her money every month, just a quiet transfer from my savings to hers. It wasn't much, but I told myself, a mother never stops helping. One Sunday, I called her on video. She answered from their new kitchen white marble counters, flowers arranged like a magazine shoot. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, waving. "I mailed a little something for your birthday. Did it arrive?" She smiled too quickly. "Yes, it came. Thank you, Mom." Behind her shoulder, I noticed the package sitting unopened on the table. The same brown paper and silver ribbon I'd tied. The tag still said, "Stay safe." Before I could mention it, Dean appeared behind her, shirt unbuttoned halfway, carrying a wineglass. He leaned into the frame. "Evening, Mrs. Hart. You look tired. You should relax more. Let the young ones handle life for a while." His tone was smooth, practiced, the kind men use when they think they're being charming while closing a door in your face. "I'm fine," I said, "just checking in." Amber laughed lightly. "Dean's right, Mom. You worry too much." "I suppose it's hard to stop," I said. "Worry's what mothers do best." Dean raised his glass. "Well, worry less. Enjoy your retirement. We've got everything under control." He kissed Amber's cheek, and she angled the camera away. The call ended with a blur of polite smiles. I sat in the silence of my apartment afterward, the laptop screen reflecting my own face back at me, gray hair, faint circles under my eyes. On the counter behind me was the identical gift box I'd wrapped for Amber. One for her, one for me. Inside mine was an empty jewelry case. Inside hers was the silver bracelet. I imagined it still sitting unopened, collecting dust in the house I'd helped her pay for. "Maybe they're busy," I murmured. "Everyone's busy." I tried to believe that. That night, I cleaned the kitchen, polished the old nurse's kit, and checked my email. There was one new message, from Amber. Subject: "Thanks again, Mom." Body: "We might need a little help this month just until Dean's project closes. Love you." I hovered over the reply button, then closed the laptop. My hands ached from years of typing chart notes, yet somehow clicking send felt heavier than any shift I'd worked. I told myself I'd think about it in the morning. Sleep didn't come. I made tea, walked from room to room. Every wall in my apartment held some remnant of her childhood. A crayon drawing, a ribbon, a photo of her in a graduation cap. I had spent decades stitching her world together, one small kindness at a time. Now, every frame looked like a patient file I'd forgotten to close. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed, a voicemail. Unknown number. I pressed play. It was her voice. She must have pocket dialed while talking to someone else. "Ah, my mom?" she was saying, exasperated. She means well, but she can't stop bleeding for people. She doesn't know how to stop bleeding herself. Ben laughter. Dean's, low and smug, and the call cut off. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words replayed in my head, soft and surgical, slicing through the quiet. She doesn't know how to stop bleeding herself. I sat down on the floor, back against the cupboard, phone still glowing in my hand. Outside, the city was silent except for the occasional siren. A sound I'd lived with my entire career, but that night, it felt aimed at me. She wasn't wrong. I didn't know how to stop. I'd made a profession out of keeping others alive. Maybe I'd forgotten that sometimes you have to let a wound close, even if it leaves a scar. I replayed the voicemail once more, then deleted it. But the sentence stayed, echoing under my ribs like a heartbeat I couldn't silence. That was the first morning, the first tiny prick before the vein bursts. A month later, I received a letter from St. Ast, Mary's Hospital, printed on thick cream paper with a gold seal in the corner. In recognition of your 25 years of service, it read, "We would be honored if you joined us for the annual Commitment Award ceremony." I hadn't stepped inside that building since retirement. The thought of walking through those halls again made my chest tighten. But also, a small part of me was proud. I'd spent half my life there. Maybe it would be good to be remembered for something other than the mistakes my daughter thought I'd made. I called Amber to tell her. She didn't answer. I left a cheerful message. "They're giving me a plaque, sweetheart. Thursday evening. You and Dean should come. There'll be dinner." No reply. On the day of the ceremony, I sat alone at a round table covered with a white cloth so crisp it crackled when I touched it. The room smelled of roses and sanitizer. They called my name, and I walked to the stage amid polite applause. A nurse I'd trained years ago handed me a glass trophy shaped like a drop of water. "For the blood you gave to heal others," the inscription read. I almost laughed at the irony. Afterward, while I stood by the punch bowl, a familiar voice behind me said, "Mrs. Hart." I turned. Dean. Dark suit, bright smile, no Amber. "It is my daughter?" I asked. He spread his hands. "Amber's tied up at a client dinner. She sends her love." Then, as if it were the most natural segue in the world, he pulled a manila envelope from his briefcase. "Actually, she asked me to bring you something to sign. Just routine paperwork." "What kind of paperwork?" "Good, a property transfer." His tone stayed light, rehearsed. "It's just to consolidate the condo investment under my name for tax purposes. We're refinancing next month. Nothing changes for you. You'll still live there as long as you like." I blinked. "Live where?" He smiled wider. "The apartment downtown. The one you helped us buy. You'll be co-owner on paper until this transfer is complete." I felt my stomach hollow out. The music from the banquet drifted behind us, violins and soft laughter, but everything in front of me went silent. "Does Amber know you're asking me this?" I said. "Of course," he replied smoothly. "She trusts me with the details. You can too. You know I treat you like my own mother." He said the word mother the way people say maid, kind, but crooked. My hand trembled as he slid the document across the table. My name was already typed under the line marked signature. The pen felt heavier than the award I'd just been given. "You only need to sign here," he said. "One stroke, and we can all move forward." I stared at the black space waiting for my name. In my head, Amber's voice replayed from that voicemail. She doesn't know how to stop bleeding herself. Maybe this was what she meant. Another vein opening, polite, transactional. The air in the ballroom thickened. The lights seemed too bright. I looked down at my hand and saw it shaking. Dean noticed. "Are you all right? Don't be nervous. This is just a formality." Something inside me went very still. I thought of the hundreds of consent forms I'd handed to frightened patients over the years, watching them sign their names without reading because they trusted me. How many times had I told them, "Don't worry, it's routine"? Maybe this was my punishment for all those blind signatures. I set the pen down carefully. "You said Amber told you to bring this?" "Yes." He hesitated, a flicker of impatience showing through his charm. "Honestly, she hates paperwork. Tell everything." I looked him straight in the eye. "Then you won't mind if I call her now?" "That's not necessary." His smile froze. "She's in a meeting." "Then we'll wait." For the first time, I saw a crack in his confidence. His eyes darted toward the door. "Mrs. Hart, you're making this more complicated than it is." I took a breath, steady, even. "Complicated is what happens when you mistake kindness for permission." He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. The tremor in my fingers had stopped. "Let me tell you something, Dean. For 20 years, I signed forms to keep people alive. This," I tapped the paper, "isn't a form. It's a funeral notice with better grammar." He laughed, short and sharp. "You're overreacting." "Maybe." I folded the document in half, then again, until it was small enough to fit in my palm. "But I'm done signing my name on other people's survival plans." Then I tore it. The sound of paper ripping was crisp, surgical. Tiny white fragments drifted to the carpet, catching the light like bits of gauze falling in an operating room. Dean stared at me, mouth open. "Amber won't like this," he said. I turned away. "Then she can call me herself." He started to say something else, but I was already walking toward the exit, the award still clutched in my other hand. Its glass edge dug into my skin, drawing a thin line of red. I didn't bother to wipe it. Outside, the night air smelled of rain and exhaust. I stood on the hospital steps, looking at the faint smear of blood on the trophy. For once, it wasn't from anyone else. That was the moment something in me shifted, quietly, decisively. "You're wrong," I whispered to the empty street. "I'm not anyone's mother anymore. Not like this." The wind lifted the shredded papers from my hand and scattered them down the pavement, white scraps swirling under the streetlight like sterile gauze falling to the floor after the operation is over. I drove home from the hospital without turning on the radio. The award plaque sat on the passenger seat, heavy and cold against my thigh, like a brick of ice. The smell of paper and ink from the torn contract clung to my hands. By the time I reached my apartment, the sky had turned the color of iodine before it burns a wound. I set the trophy down on the kitchen counter, next to my old nurse's kit. For years it had lived under my bed, dented and dusty, but lately I'd left it out where I could see it. Maybe I'd been waiting for this moment without knowing it. I opened the lid. Inside was nothing but a single roll of gauze, yellowed at the edges. All the spare bills, the receipts, the little notes to myself, gone. I had drained it just as surely as I had drained myself. I sat at the table, staring at the roll of gauze. Phew, my hands were shaking, not from fear this time, but from something like release. I picked up a pair of scissors from the drawer and cut the gauze in half. One piece I kept. The other, I laid on a ceramic plate and struck a match. It burned slowly, curling into a black thread, the smell of scorched cotton rising like an old ghost. I watched until it crumbled into ash. From now on, I said aloud, voice steady, I only bandage my own wounds. The sound of my own words startled me. I hadn't heard that tone in my voice for years. Firm, low, like the voice I used with panicking patients. A voice that didn't ask permission. I pulled my laptop toward me and opened my banking app. The screen glowed a sterile blue. One by one, I canceled every automatic transfer to Amber's account. Tuition long since paid, rent long since covered, but the drip had continued. Not anymore. Click. Cancelled. Click. Cancelled. Each keystroke felt like a stitch closing a gash. Then I opened my phone and scrolled to Dean's number. My thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment. Look. Confirm. Gone. His texts, his calls, his polite threats, all of it sealed off like an infected wound behind fresh sutures. I went through my calendar and erased the reminders. Send a grocery card. Check on Amber's utilities. Wire deposit to Dean. Each deletion was like cutting an IV tube. The silence afterward was louder than any alarm. My hands were trembling so hard I had to brace them on the table. But inside my chest something was lifting inch by inch like a bandage being peeled away. I thought of the night I first swore Amber would never have to call anyone else Mom. I had kept that promise. I had kept every promise. I had bled for her, in every way a person can bleed without dying. But bleeding isn't the same as loving. Sometimes it's just hemorrhage. I remembered the voicemail. She doesn't know how to stop bleeding herself. Maybe, for once, she'd been right. Forgiveness had become my bandage. Endless. Automatic. Pull off the old gauze, slap on a new one, hide the wound. I thought it made me strong. But strength isn't always silent. Sometimes it's saying no before the next cut. I opened the window to let the smoke out. Cool air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain. Below, the streetlights flickered on, little pools of amber, her name in the dark. I wondered if she was still at that dinner, laughing at Dean's jokes, unaware of what had just shifted. I whispered to the empty room, I forgive you. Then, after a beat, but I'm done. I picked up the other half of the gauze and rolled it tightly, neat and clean. It looked like a new beginning in miniature. I placed it back into the nurse's kit, closed the lid, and snapped the latch shut. The click echoed like a door closing. For the first time in years, I didn't reach for my phone before bed. I didn't check if Amber needed something, if Dean had texted, if the bank balance had dipped again. I lay back and listened to my own heartbeat. It was slow, steady, unfamiliar. All night I dreamed of sewing, not the frantic, sloppy stitches of the ER, but a single deliberate line, closing a wound exactly where it needed to close. In the dream, my hands didn't shake. When I woke, sunlight filled the room. The award plaque still sat on the counter, its glass edge catching the light. I noticed a tiny smear of blood where it had cut my palm the night before. A drop of my own, finally not given away. I washed my hands, dried them, and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who had walked into that banquet hall. She looked older, yes, but also sharper, like a photograph finally brought into focus. I smiled, not wide, but enough. I'm not the one bleeding anymore, I said to the mirror. I'm the one holding the needle. The week after I blocked Dean's number, the apartment felt unnaturally quiet. No buzzing phone, no incoming transfers to approve, no late-night messages asking for help. Silence should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like standing in a hospital corridor after the crash cart rolls away. Too still, too bright, waiting for the next alarm. Amber didn't call. At first I told myself she was embarrassed, or angry, or both. I left the phone on the table, screen down, pretending not to check it every hour. Outside, spring came early. The maple trees outside my window began to bud, tiny bursts of red like drops of blood on the branches. I went for long walks, cooked small meals, tried to remember what it felt like to live for no one else. The world kept turning, but inside I could sense pressure building, the way air thickens before a thunderstorm. One afternoon, I opened my email and froze. The subject line read, "He'd ask. Urgent." It was from Martha, an old colleague from St. C. Mary's. "Eleanor, I heard something strange. They're saying you covered up a dosing error years ago. Please tell me it isn't true. You might want to be careful. Dean's been asking around." I reread the message 3 times. Dean. Of course, when money and guilt stop working, people reach for fear. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The fan hummed softly. 25 years of spotless records, and now, this rumor-perfect timing, perfectly cruel. If the story spread, the hospital could revoke my award, maybe even my pension. A part of me wanted to run, to explain, to defend myself. The nurse in me wanted to triage the damage immediately, but another part. The part that had watched that gauze burn to ash remained calm. He wanted a reaction. I wouldn't give him one. I typed a short reply to Martha, "Thank you for letting me know. No mistakes were hidden. And if he asks again, tell him I've retired from bleeding." I hit send and closed the laptop. That night, the quiet thickened. Every creak of the floor sounded like a knock. Every passing car light flashed across the wall like a scalpel blade. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching rain smear the streetlights into long red streaks. It reminded me of the trauma bay after a bad accident. Everything blurred, metallic, waiting for someone to call time of death. Somewhere inside, I knew the next step was coming. Dean was too proud to lose without retaliation, and Amber was too entangled to stop him. I checked the nurse's kit on the counter. The half roll of gauze still neatly coiled inside. Not a talisman, exactly, or like a reminder. Keep pressure, but don't reopen the wound. The next morning, an envelope slid under my door. No stamp, no name. Inside was a photocopy of an old patient chart, one of mine, with a yellow sticky note attached. Maybe the press would find this interesting. I laughed, a small, dry sound that surprised me. They had done their homework. The date on the file was from 18 years ago, a case that ended in recovery, not death. But a headline doesn't need truth, just blood. I folded the paper carefully, placed it in the nurse's kit beside the gauze, and shut the lid. If they wanted a war, they would learn I still knew how to sterilize a battlefield. By evening, the phone began to vibrate, once, twice, again and again. Blocked numbers, unknown numbers, voicemails with nothing but breathing on the other end. The storm had arrived right on schedule. When the screen lit up a 5th time, I didn't need to look to know who it was. Amber calling. The name pulsed blue in the dark like a monitor flatlining and trying to start again. I watched it ring until the sound stopped. A minute later, it rang again. Then again. I set the phone on the table, face up, and poured another cup of tea. The steam rose in soft curls, fogging the screen until her name blurred away. She would call again, or come knocking, or send someone else. They always do. But this time, I wasn't the woman waiting behind a door with open arms. This time, I had locked it from the inside. "I know they'll knock someday," I murmured into the quiet. "But when they do this time, I won't open." Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far off. The first drops hit the window like small, deliberate taps. The storm was on its way. It was a gray Saturday when the knock finally came. 3 sharp raps. No doorbell, no hesitation. I'd always known it would sound like that. I didn't have to look through the peephole to know. Dean. And behind him, Amber. I opened the door just enough for the chain to hold. Whatever you're selling, I said, I'm not buying. He smirked. Good thing, because this isn't for sale. Then he held up a folder thick with papers. Amber stood behind him, pale, eyes swollen as if she'd been crying or pretending to. Mom, she whispered, please. We just need to talk. The word mom hit like static in my ears. I unlatched the chain and stepped back. 5 minutes. They walked in as though the apartment were theirs. Dean set the folder on my kitchen table, straightened his tie, and looked around. Cozy, he said, smaller than I imagined. I folded my arms. Say what you came to say. He opened the folder with a neat little flourish, the way surgeons uncover a wound they already know is infected. Inside were copies of patient charts, emails, and a single printed statement. He tapped the stack. Recognize these? From St. P. Mary's. The year 2007. I didn't answer. Dean leaned closer. Word is, you covered up a dosage error that nearly killed a patient. You never reported it. Technically, that's negligence. Which means, if we take this public, your award, your pension, gone. Ah, Amber gasped softly. Dean, he raised a hand. I'm just explaining the situation. Then he looked at me and smiled. Unless, of course, you help us out. Amber's still recovering from her accident. Or night. She needs more tests. Blood tests. And since you're the only O-negative donor in the family, the implication hung there, sour and heavy. If I don't? I asked. He shrugged. Then the hospital gets an anonymous envelope Monday morning. I imagine they won't look kindly on concealed malpractice. Amber's voice cracked. Dean, stop, please. He ignored her. You see, Mrs. Hart, this can go one of two ways. Either you give a little blood and everyone stays happy, or you watch everything you built go down the drain. It's really that simple. I stared at the papers spread across my table. For years that table had held birthday cakes, cups of tea, a daughter's laughter. Now it looked like an autopsy tray. Finally, I said quietly, I saved that patient. I saved dozens more after that. What have you ever saved, Dean? He gave a short, sharp laugh. Myself. And that's enough. Amber wiped her face. Mom, he's just scared. We all are. Please, just sign the consent form for the blood draw. After that, we'll never bother you again. Her voice trembled, but underneath it I heard Dean's rhythm. His manipulation rehearsed through her mouth. I looked at her. Really looked. She was wearing the silver bracelet I'd given her on her wedding day. The engraving, "Stay safe," caught the light like a knife edge. You safe, Amber? I asked. She hesitated. Of course. No, I said softly. You're just obedient. Dean's smile thinned. Let's keep this civil, shall we? He shoved the consent form across the table and placed a pen beside it. A few drops, that's all. Sign here. I didn't touch it. I walked to the sink, filled a glass of water, and drank slowly. Every sound in the room sharpened. The tick of the clock, the hum of the fridge, the faint rasp of Amber's breathing. When I turned back, my voice was steady. For 30 years I gave blood, time, and sleep to strangers who never thanked me. I did it because that's what nurses do. But you, I pointed at the folder. You're not asking for blood? You're asking for control? Dean's jaw tightened. You're being dramatic. I set the empty glass on the table. The bottom hit the wood with a hollow thud. Maybe, but drama's all you understand. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you think you can fight me. I met his eyes. Fight you? No. I'll just stop feeding you. He blinked, thrown off balance. Amber suddenly burst out. Mom, please. I'm in pain, can't you see that? I need you. I felt something twist in my chest. An old instinct, the urge to rush forward, to help. But it passed like a spasm that's already healed. I know you're hurting, I said quietly. But you've never once looked at the pain you caused me. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to look either. Dean slammed the folder shut. Enough of this. Papers fluttered to the floor. You're a selfish old woman clinging to guilt. You'll regret this. I didn't flinch. I already have. He grabbed the glass from the table, half intending to throw it, then thought better and slammed it down. Water splashed across the papers, blurring the ink into red-brown streaks where his fingers had cut earlier on the paper edge. The sound echoed through the small apartment, sharp, final, like a scalpel dropped into a tray. You're finished, he hissed. No, I said. I'm sterilized. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Amber took a step toward me. Ace, Mom, just once more. You're the only one who can help. I shook my head. I've helped enough. Dean grabbed the folder, dripping wet, and stuffed it back into his briefcase. Fine, he snapped. Don't say I didn't offer peace. He stalked toward the door. Amber lingered, trembling. I looked at her. The girl who once bandaged her doll's wrist, who used to wait for me under hospital lights, humming to herself. I wanted to tell her I still loved her, but love had to mean something different now. Go home, Amber, I said. Leo, take care of yourself. She whispered, You really won't do it? I shook my head. She looked at Dean, then back at me. He said you'd choose pride over family. He was right. Her words hit hard, but I kept my eyes on the floor until the door shut behind them. The apartment fell silent. Then, crash. They'd knocked over the glass outside. It shattered on the hallway tile. I waited for the sound of footsteps fading down the stairs, then locked the door. The smell of spilled water and paper filled the air. Clean, sharp, like antiseptic after surgery. I leaned against the door, breathing in that sterile silence. My reflection in the window looked pale, but steady. On the counter, the nurse's kit sat open, the roll of gauze still there, untouched. I closed it gently and latched the clasp. I used to bandage other people's blood, I whispered. Now I keep mine for myself. A thunderclap rolled outside, shaking the window panes. The storm had arrived, full and furious, but I didn't move. Let it rain. The wounds were already closed. Rumors spread faster than infections. At least infections can be traced back to a source. Rumors just bloom, sudden, airborne, everywhere at once. The week after I threw Dean out, I went to the grocery store on the corner and felt the air change around me. The cashier, a girl who used to call me Miss Ellie, kept her eyes on the scanner the whole time. The woman bagging oranges whispered to the man behind me and tilted her chin in my direction. When I looked up, they both dropped their gazes, guilty and curious, like children caught staring at a scar. On the walk home, Mrs. Patel from 4B, who had shared soup with me when I had the flu, gave me a smile so bright it looked like a bandage, white, useless, barely sticking. How are you, dear? She asked, voice too high. Clean, I said. You? Everyone's talking, she blurted, then flushed. I mean, people say things. They don't know. I told them you were lovely. Her eyes slid away. Well, you take care. By the time I reached my building, 2 more neighbors had offered those same bright, useless smiles. I carried my groceries upstairs and set them on the counter without unpacking them. The apartment felt smaller, the air warmer, as if someone had been standing in the center of the room, breathing heavily, and had just stepped out of sight. The email from St. Mary's was waiting. Subject: Award Ceremony. Follow-up. Dear Ms. Hart, we have received information calling into question your compliance with hospital reporting standards during your tenure. In light of this, we are temporarily suspending formal recognition until a review is completed. We appreciate your understanding. Respectfully, Office of Professional Standards, St. Mary's Hospital. No signature, no name, just an office and a decision. I read it twice, then 3 times, as if repetition would change a single letter. The glass award sat on my shelf, catching the light. For a moment, I could see my own face fractured across its edges, one eye kind, the other flat as a shuttered window. I forwarded the email to Martha. It's begun. Her reply came fast. I'm so sorry. I know this is him. What my says? I'll ask around quietly. I typed and erased 3 responses before writing the only thing that felt true. Don't bleed on my behalf. Not yet. Dean worked quickly. He would have made an efficient triage nurse, the way he prioritized targets. Hospital first, neighbors next, then friends. The ones who had stayed for years and were hardest to turn. He couldn't make them hate me, but he could make them uncertain. Uncertainty is a solvent. It loosens everything. It started with whispers in the lobby. She's the one who refused to help her daughter, right? I heard she has cognitive issues. No, I heard she covered up a mistake at the hospital, and they're coming for her license. I returned a book to the library and found a sticky note tucked into the cover when I got home. Do the right thing. No signature. No courage. At night, my phone lit up with unknown numbers and brief voicemails. Gaps of silence, a throat clearing, a man laughing far away. Once, a recorded message. Don't you think mothers should help their children? I sat in the dark with the phone pressed to my chest and listened to my heartbeat answer. Like this. Not anymore. Amber didn't call. When she finally did, the screen flashed her name and then went dark again, as if even her phone was ambivalent. I went to the park one morning just to feel the world without walls. A breeze moved through the trees, shaking loose the pollen, the small, soft beginnings of summer. On a bench near the fountain, I saw two women from the building. They turned the volume on their voices up one notch when I passed. Such a shame, one said. Sometimes it's a sickness, said the other. Selfishness. I wanted to sit beside them and say, no, the sickness is dependence. I stopped the drip. But I didn't. I kept walking. I didn't owe them an explanation, not yet, maybe not ever. 2 days later, Martha called from an unlisted number. He's been to the hospital twice, she said without preamble. He asked for archived incident reports, told the clerk he was helping a retired staffer clear up confusion. Her voice tightened. He left with copies of your old cases. He's cherry-picking. Let him cherry-pick, I said. He'll choke on the pit. Eleanor, I know, I said. Thank you. Do you want me to speak to the board? No, I said. Not yet. I have a plan. The words came out before I knew I would say them. But as soon as they were in the air, they felt right. The plan hadn't formed fully, but the outline was there. A sterile field, instruments laid out, a procedure I'd performed in other shapes for other reasons. Preparation is its own anesthesia. After we hung up, I made tea and set my phone on the table. I opened the voice recorder app and pressed a button I'd ignored for years. Auto record. Unknown calls. A simple toggle. On, off. How tidy the world looks when you name its switches. Then I called my service provider and asked them to enable call logs with audio backups to the cloud. The woman on the line spoke as if I were requesting an exotic surgery. Are you sure you want this, ma'am? It can be. A lot of data. I've handled a lot, I said. Turn it on. When the confirmation email arrived, I created a folder on my desktop and named it Hemostasis, the body's process for stopping a bleed. I dragged the email into it. Then I dragged the hospital announcement, the sticky note I'd scanned, a photo of the library message, and a new document with names and dates. The folder icon glowed, a small sealed wound on my screen. Foreshadowing doesn't feel like foreshadowing while you're living it. It feels like sweeping the floor with no idea who will slip on it later. On Thursday, I was leaving the building when Mr. First, Alvarez from 3A, stepped into the elevator with me. He stared at the floors. "Who's your daughter?" he said, tone neutral, like a nurse asking about bowel movements. "She's alive." I pressed the button for the lobby. "Thank you." He nodded, then blurted. "My sister said she saw a post on the neighborhood app about you. They're saying you abandoned her." "I didn't abandon her," I said quietly. "I quit donating blood I wasn't obligated to give." He looked uncomfortable. "Well, people don't understand medical stuff." I smiled without my teeth. "They understand one word. Fine. No?" The doors opened. He hesitated, then said, "You were always kind to my mother. You carried her groceries when her legs were bad." "And I'd do it again," I said. "Kindness isn't a transfusion. It's a choice." He looked as if he wanted to ask more, but he didn't. I walked out into the sun. The day smelled like cut grass and distant rain. Somewhere, a child laughed, the high, clean sound cutting through the low hum of traffic. The world kept going. It always does. The hospital called that afternoon, an administrator with a careful voice. Ms. Hart, we're moving forward with a preliminary review. It isn't an accusation, just due diligence. I understand. I'm sure you do, she said, relieved by my calm. If we need statements, we'll reach out. After we hung up, a message popped into my call log. Keen, unknown caller recorded. I opened the file and listened to my own voice, steady and even, saying, I understand. I titled it Hospital. Preliminary review, and dropped it into hemostasis. The folder felt heavier. Good. The universe seemed to take it as permission. The calls multiplied. Neighbors checking in, the board asking for dates, an old patient leaving a kind message that made my throat tighten. Let everything. Not because I wanted to hoard sound, but because keeping a record felt like holding pressure on a wound. Firm, constant, necessary. Nights stretched. Sleep came in thin strips. I didn't cry. I thought of the women at the park and their certainty that selfishness is a sickness. I thought of Amber's silence, which had always been her sharpest weapon. I thought of Dean's confidence, the way it soured into menace when I didn't break. People say I'm cruel, I said to the empty kitchen once, practicing the truth out loud. But no one asks how much blood I lost to become this person. I said it again, to the recorder this time. Line to use if pressed. It made me laugh, dark, humorless. Still, it helped. Naming a thing pins it down long enough to stitch around it. A week into the smear, I decided to go to the pharmacy 2 blocks over instead of the one downstairs. Walking felt like agency. At the counter, I ran into a nurse from my old floor. Tasha, hair in a bright scarf, smile hesitant. You're in his heart, she said. I heard things. I know, I said. They're loud, aren't they? She lowered her voice. I don't believe them. Yeah. But the board's nervous. Dean handed them a packet with tabs and highlights. He's showy. He's desperate, I said. That looks the same from a distance. Tasha glanced toward the security camera, then leaned in. If you need a statement from me, I'll give one. You saved my butt 100 times. Not yet, I said. Soon. You okay? She asked softly. People call me ruthless, I said. No one asks what it took to get here. Her mouth twitched. Put that on a t-shirt. Maybe I will. On my way out, she pressed a small item into my hand, a disposable voice-activated recorder the hospital used during complicated consults. It picks up everything within 10 feet, she said, just in case. I smiled for real then, the kind that warms you from the inside. Thank you, Tasha. Walking home, I felt the recorder's weight in my pocket, small and dense as a lucky stone. It wasn't luck, though. It was readiness. That night, at 9:13, the phone rang from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a notification. New recording saved. I pressed play. Mrs. Hart. Dean's voice said, smooth as a gloved hand. He can end this politely. Sign the donation consent tomorrow, and I'll retract what I've shared. Otherwise, well, I hear the press likes stories about cruel mothers. He paused, then added almost kindly, You don't want to die alone, do you? I didn't speak. The recorder didn't need me to. It captured the silence too, the part where I didn't beg. When the message ended, I saved it as Dean Extortion 1 and backed it up 3 times. Cloud, USB, email to myself. Then I wrote the time and date on a sticky note and placed it inside the nurse's kit, beneath the roll of gauze. A little's ad. My breath was steady. Somewhere, an old version of me, the one who apologized to a locked door, was lying down to finally sleep. The next morning, I posted a single sentence on the neighborhood board under my real name. I won't be addressing rumors here. When I do speak, it will be with evidence. Within minutes, responses rolled in, defensive, curious, hostile, supportive, the full human spectrum. I didn't reply. I brewed coffee and watched sunlight creep across my floor like iodine washing a wound. Clean, antiseptic, merciless. By noon, Martha texted, Dean 2. Public session. Good, I wrote back. Let him love a crowd. She sent a thumbs up and a heart. I stared at the heart for a long time, then set the phone face down and exhaled. All afternoon, my doorbell didn't ring. My phone buzzed, but not with numbers that mattered. I finalized my folder. I checked batteries on the recorder Tasha had given me. I laid everything out on the table the way we laid instruments for surgery. Orderly, exact, with the cold confidence of people who know where each blade goes. When evening fell, I made soup I didn't taste and stood by the window. In the glass, I saw myself with the city behind me, small, resolved, lit from within by an anger that wasn't hot anymore. It was warm and clean, like a sterilized tool. The phone rang then, vibrating against the wood. Amber. I didn't answer. I let it ring. Watched her name flare and dim, like an EKG finding its rhythm and losing it again. It rang a second time. I turned the ringer off. I know they'll knock someday, I said aloud, voice even, but when they do, this time I won't open. Outside, a wind picked up, swirling old leaves across the pavement. It sounded like pages turning. Inside, the apartment settled. The nurse's kit gleamed faintly on the counter, the latch reflecting a thin line of light, a single, precise stitch holding everything closed, for now. Tomorrow would come. So would the meeting. So would Dean's brightest smile. Let him bring his folder and his certainty. I had my own instruments ready. And I had finally remembered the first rule they teach you in trauma. Stop the bleed before you do anything else. It was nearly midnight when I found it. I'd left the laptop open on the kitchen table, the glow from the screen painting the room that thin, surgical blue that never lets you rest. I was reviewing my call logs, making sure every recording had uploaded to the cloud, when a new notification slid into the corner of the screen. Incoming mail. Dean Whitmore. For a second, I thought it was another threat, another string of half-smiles written in legal jargon. But the subject line froze me. Authorization confirmation. Donor ID attached. I clicked. The message was short, too short for Dean, who normally loved the sound of his own syntax. 2. St. Mary's Hospital. Donor services from. In Whitmore. Subject. Confirmation of automatic donation authority. Please verify that the attached form remains valid. My mother-in-law, Eleanor Hart, has previously consented to the use of her own negative blood for emergency transfusion related to our family members. This serves as written notice of her ongoing authorization. Cards. Dean Whitmore. Attached. A scanned document with my name. My signature copied cleanly from the consent form I'd signed decades ago for anonymous hospital donations. The date had been changed. The line reading, voluntary, one time, was gone. Forgery. Simple, lazy, effective. The cursor blinked in the corner of the screen, the way a heart monitor blinks before the line goes flat. I didn't shout. Didn't swear. I simply leaned back in the chair and let the air move through me. Anger would have been a luxury, and luxuries are for people who don't already know the anatomy of disaster. I'd seen real blood on walls, on uniforms, on trembling hands. And this? This was imitation, digital and clean. I've seen real blood, I murmured, eyes on the glowing screen. So I know when it's fake. I clicked print. The machine whirred in the corner, slow, deliberate, like a ventilator counting breaths. When the sheet slid out, still warm, I held it by the corner and watched the ink dry. My name looked alien there, obedient in someone else's hands. I folded the paper once, then again, and slipped it into the old nurse's kit beside the roll of gauze. The clasp clicked shut, a sound that reminded me of sealing a wound I didn't sleep. Instead, I brewed coffee, the bitter kind I used to drink on night shifts, and began to take notes. Dates. Times. File names. Each entry went into a notebook with a red cover, the kind medical students use for pathology sketches. April 12, 11:47 p.m. Dean to St. Mary's. Forged consent. Evidence printed. April 13th, 12. 6 a.m. Recorded voicemail, 21, cruel mothers. April 13th, 12:11 a.m. Initiated backup protocol. Folder. Hemostasis. Every line steadied me. Documentation is a pulse. If you're writing, you're still alive. When the pot was empty, I stood by the window and looked out at the streetlights. Each one shimmered in the rain, tiny beacons spaced evenly apart, like the rhythm of a heartbeat across the city. I wondered how many people were awake at that hour, defending themselves against ghosts they'd once loved. By morning the rain had stopped. I called Martha. Something new? She asked, voice low, already knowing the answer. He forged my consent, I said. Claimed I'd authorized automatic blood use for their emergencies. A hiss of breath. That's criminal. That's desperate, I corrected. Criminal is what comes next. Do you want me to report it? Not yet. Let him think I haven't seen it. She was silent for a moment. You sound calm. I've spent my life in emergency rooms, I said. Calm is the only way you survive one. The rest of the day, I moved with surgical precision. I backed up the email on 3 drives, took photos of the printout, and emailed a copy to myself using a new account under a different name. I checked the metadata timestamp, IP address, attachment path. All of it led back to Dean. Amateur mistake. He hadn't scrubbed the sender ID. By afternoon, I had more than a rumor. I had proof. I ordered a small safe online, one with a digital keypad, and cleared space under the sink for it. While waiting for the delivery, I went through the nurse's kit again, laying everything out as though preparing for a procedure. Scissors, tape, the half-burned gauze, the flash drive with recordings, and now the printed email. I realized I built my own trauma bay evidence instead of instruments, but the same ritual. The same vow, do no harm, but don't let harm go unanswered. That evening, the sun slipped behind the buildings and the apartment filled with that dull amber light that makes everything look half alive. I sat at the table with the recorder Tasha had given me, testing it, placing it in different corners to gauge how far the microphone reached. The playback caught the hum of the refrigerator, the squeak of my chair, the soft sound of me exhaling. Enough detail to convince anyone later that they were hearing a room at peace before impact. Halfway through the test, the phone buzzed. Unknown number. I pressed record and answered. Mrs. Hart, a woman's voice said, polite, businesslike. This is Lillian from St. Sortricia, Mary's Donor Services. I'm calling to confirm that your authorization form remains current. My throat tightened, but my tone stayed smooth. Could you read the date on that form, please? April 12th? This year, she said. It appears to have been submitted by a family representative. Mr. Dean Whitmore. Thank you for confirming, I said. And please note, for the record, that the document is fraudulent. I have not signed or authorized any ongoing consent. Would you like me to send you the evidence? A pause. Then, careful words. Yes, ma'am, please do. I'll email you shortly. I hung up, saved the recording, and labeled it Stem Mary's call proof. Then I sent her the scanned copy of Dean's email with one line in the message body. Forgery attached. My attorney will follow up. I didn't have an attorney yet, but the word buys time. In emergencies, time is oxygen. Afterward, I sat for a long while, listening to the building breathe. The pipes settling, someone's TV murmuring 2 floors below, rain starting again against the windows. Everything looked ordinary. Ordinary is what danger wears when it wants to be efficient. I poured the last of the coffee, cold and bitter, and spoke to the empty room. If they want a war, I said softly, they've forgotten where I used to work. Because wars, like traumas, have triage. You assess, you isolate. 1D, you cut away infection. And I'd spent a lifetime doing exactly that. I closed the laptop, slid the recorder and the red notebook into the nurse's kit, and latched it shut. The metal clicked, sharp and final. Outside, lightning flashed once, lighting the kitchen white as an operating theater. For an instant, I saw my own reflection in the window face calm, eyes bright, mouth still. No anger left, only precision. By morning, I knew exactly what had to be done. In an emergency, you don't wait for permission. You assemble your team, sterilize your tools, and cut before the patient dies. So I called Martha. She picked up on the first ring. "I was hoping you'd call," she said, breathless. "I barely slept after what you sent me." "I didn't either," I said. "But I have a plan." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Tell me. I'm not going to hide anymore. We'll go to the hospital board publicly. I'll show them the forged email before Dean can twist it. But I need it to be clean. No emotion. Just evidence." "That's your specialty," she said, and I could hear her smile. "What do you need from me?" "Backup. Documentation that proves my record was spotless. And, Martha, someone who can testify that I was the one who caught other people's errors." "I owe you more than that," she said softly. "You covered for me that night in pediatrics. Remember the transfusion mix-up? You took the blame so I wouldn't lose my license." "I remember," I said, borrowing nothing. "But you'll help me, because you know what it's like when men like Dean think silence is compliance." She exhaled sharply. "When do we start?" "Now." That afternoon, I met her at a quiet cafe near the hospital. She looked older, but still had that efficient kindness nurses carry like a second pulse. We spread out our files on the table. Printouts, receipts, timestamps, photographs of the forged authorization form. To anyone watching, it could have looked like two women studying a crossword puzzle. Martha pointed at the forged signature. "The hospital's internal mail system records every sender's IP. I can pull Dean's login metadata through my old credentials." I blinked. "You still have access?" She grinned. "They never revoked my administrative password. You taught me to keep spares." I almost laughed. "That I did." We worked for hours, cross-checking timestamps and downloading backup logs. When she found the metadata, she turned the laptop toward me. There it was in black and white. Dean's IP address, time-stamped to the same minute as the email. I took a photo of the screen, heart steady. "That's the artery," I said. "Now we just have to clamp it." The hospital board met every other Wednesday in the East Conference Room. Martha knew someone on the inside. Dr. Patel, one of the new administrators who confirmed Dean had requested an appointment that same week to clarify a donor discrepancy. Perfect. Let him walk in first. We filed the request for my counterstatement the same afternoon. It was approved within an hour. Maybe someone on the board remembered how many night shifts I'd covered for them. When I got home, the apartment looked different. The air felt charged, clean, like the moment before a defibrillator strikes. I placed the nurse's kit on the kitchen table and opened it. Inside were all my instruments. The printed emails, the flash drive, the red notebook, the recorder. Full of gauze. I lifted it out and unrolled a few inches, smoothing the fabric flat across the table. Its white surface reflected the light like a sterile sheet. I realized it was the only thing in my life that hadn't betrayed me. Soft, functional, unpretentious. I rolled it back up neatly and returned it to the kit. "Every surgery starts with clean tools," I whispered. Even the spiritual kind. Over the next 2 days, I practiced what I would say to the board. Not from memory, emotion makes you forget, but from rhythm, the way you remember how to breathe through pain. Martha came over on the second night. She sat across from me with a mug of coffee, playing the role of the board chair. "State your name for the record," she said. "Eleanor Hart," I replied, hands on the table. "Retired nurse, 25 years at St. Teoth. Mary's." "And why are you here today?" "To correct a record," I said slowly. "To remind this institution that healing and honesty are the same thing." She raised an eyebrow. "A bit poetic." "Let them call it poetic," I said. "Sleuth can afford style." She smiled. "Continue." I stood up and began pacing, holding my notebook like a chart. On April 12th, a forged email was sent to the Donor Services Department from Mr. Service. Dean Whitmore, my son-in-law, claiming that I had authorized automatic blood donations for family use. The document was falsified using a decades-old consent form. I have provided metadata, timestamps, and voice recordings to prove it. Martha clapped lightly. Good tempo. Calm, factual, no victim tone. I'm not a victim, I said. I'm the one holding the needle. Her smile softened. You really mean to face him in person? Yes. If I hide again, I'll start bleeding again. We rehearsed twice more until my voice stopped shaking on the hard lines. Every word felt like a suture, tight, clean, final. When I stumbled, Martha reminded me, You've seen worse, Ellie. Remember the cardiac arrest in 2011? You worked through 3 code blues without flinching. That's different, I said. Back then, someone else was on the table. She leaned forward. Not this time. When she left that night, she hugged me. Her hands smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. You're going to win, she said. I'm not trying to win, I told her. I'm trying to disinfect the truth. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I turned on the lamp, sat at the table, and opened the nurse's kit one more time. The contents glowed under the warm light. Printed pages, flash drive, recorder, gauze. My history in fragments, but finally sterile. I took the roll of gauze out again, looked at it for a long moment, then placed it gently back inside, like a surgeon laying out the final instrument before the operation. For years, that box had held money, keys, keepsakes of someone who lived for others. Now it held evidence, truth, and the fragments of my own reclamation. I closed the lid and pressed the latch down. The click echoed softly through the room. Key. It sounded like readiness. The next morning, I dressed in a navy blouse and gray slacks, neutral colors, the kind nurses wear when they need authority without armor. I tied my hair back and looked in the mirror. My reflection was steady. My eyes were clear. I placed the nurse's kit in my bag and whispered to it like an old friend, You've patched everyone else. Time to patch me. Then I practiced one last line in front of the mirror, the one I wanted to end with. I no longer save others. Today, I'm saving my own name. The words settled in the air, clean and certain. I switched off the light, took a deep breath, and stepped into the hallway. The storm had passed outside, leaving the sky rinsed and sharp. It was the kind of morning that makes everything look newly disinfected. Tomorrow would be the surgery, the one where the wound finally closes. The conference hall at St. Mary's hadn't changed in 20 years. Same beige walls. Same faint hum of the overhead lights. Same cheap coffee that always smelled like burned hope. But that morning, the air felt charged, like the seconds before a defibrillator fires. Rows of chairs lined the back of the room. Local journalists were setting up cameras, murmuring into microphones. The board sat in a curved line at the front, faces arranged in that neutral, professional way people wear when they expect a scandal but don't yet know its size. I stood near the window, my nurse's kit clutched in both hands. The latch clicked softly against my palm. I could feel the weight of every item inside. The printouts, the flash drive, the recorder, the red notebook, the roll of gauze. My life distilled to evidence. 5. Martha leaned toward me. You ready? As ready as anyone before an operation, I said. You? Always, she whispered, and squeezed my arm. The door opened. Dean walked in first. He wore confidence like cologne. Too much? Too thick? His suit was perfectly tailored, his smile rehearsed. Amber followed a few steps behind, looking smaller than I remembered, her hair tied back, eyes rimmed red. She clutched her purse like a shield. He scanned the room, saw the cameras, and smiled wider. Perfect turnout, he said to no one in particular. Let's make this efficient. Please. The board chair, Dr. Patel, cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore, Miss Hart, thank you for coming. We understand there's been some confusion. Dean placed a folder on the table. Not confusion, misconduct. My mother-in-law has falsified consent documents and is now trying to accuse me of fraud to cover her tracks. A murmur rippled through the room. Flashbulbs went off. Dean turned slightly toward the cameras. Just enough to catch his good side. Patel adjusted his glasses. And Mrs. Hart, you dispute this claim? I met his eyes. Completely. He nodded. Then please, both of you, present your statements. Dean gestured like a salesman unveiling a product. Ladies and gentlemen, Attached are documents showing an established authorization for family use blood transfusions, signed by Mrs. Zister, Hart herself. The signature matches her previous medical forms. As her son-in-law, I only acted to confirm her intent. The hospital was within its rights to rely on that consent. He paused for effect. It's unfortunate that age sometimes causes confusion. But my only goal was to protect my wife's health. Amber flinched. That last line, that little knife disguised as compassion, was Dean's signature move. I'd seen doctors use it too, when they didn't want to admit a mistake. It's not my fault. It's biology. I waited for the room to quiet, then stood. My voice was steady, lower than usual. May I speak? The chair nodded. I placed my nurse's kit on the table and unlatched the clasp. The sound echoed. Small, metallic, final. Then, I lifted out a stack of papers, the flash drive, and the recorder. On April 12th, I began, an email was sent to the St. Mary's Donor Services Department. It claimed I had authorized ongoing use of my blood for family transfusions. The message originated from Mr. Dean Whitmore's IP address at 11:47 p.m., confirmed by hospital metadata. It included a scanned document forged from a decades-old consent form. My original one-time authorization was altered. The date changed, the wording deleted. I looked up. This is the printed email. This. I held up the flash drive. Contains the digital copy, with metadata. And this. I pressed play on the recorder. Is his voicemail from April 13th. Dean's voice filled the room, smooth, confident, unmistakable. Sign the donation consent tomorrow, and I'll retract what I've shared. Otherwise, the press loves stories about cruel mothers. You don't want to die alone, do you? The room erupted. Reporters whispered furiously. Cameras clicked like a swarm of locusts. Amber covered her mouth with her hand. Dean went pale. That's taken out of context, he stammered. You don't know. I pressed another button. The second file played. The hospital administrator's confirmation call, reading the forged date aloud. Then my voice, calm and precise. Please note, for the record, that the document is fraudulent. When the playback ended, the silence was surgical. Clean, exact, waiting for the incision. Dr. Patel leaned forward. Mr. Whitmore, would you like to explain this? Dean swallowed. It's not what it sounds like. She's manipulating. Enough, Patel said sharply. We'll let the evidence speak. I gathered the papers into a neat stack. Dean didn't forge this for money, I said, my voice clear. They forged it for control. Because some men can't survive unless a woman's veins stay open for them. Someone in the audience gasped. Cameras flashed again. You vindictive old. Careful, I said softly. You're bleeding. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even Patel couldn't hide a flicker of grim amusement. Dean's lawyer tried to interject, but the words drowned in the noise. The security guard at the door stepped closer. Amber suddenly stood up. Stop, she cried. Please, everyone stop. Her voice trembled, but it carried. The room quieted. She turned to me, tears streaking her cheeks. Oh, Mom, I didn't know. He said you'd already agreed. I swear, I didn't know. I met her eyes. For a moment she wasn't 32 and married to a monster. She was 6 again, holding a doll with a bandaged arm. I know, I said gently, but now you have to learn what it means to take responsibility for your own blood. Amber sobbed, covering her face. Ian turned toward her. Amber, don't. Don't what? She shouted, voice breaking. Don't see what you really are? He reached for her arm, but she pulled away. Please, you used me. You used her. You used everyone. Security? Patel said quietly. 2 guards approached. Dean backed up, hands raised. You can't arrest me. This is ridiculous. Patel's tone was flat. Extortion. Fraud. We'll let the police decide. As they took him by the elbow, he looked back at me, eyes full of venom. Think you've won? I met his glare with a calm that came from somewhere deeper than pride. No, I said. I think I've stopped losing. When he was gone, the air shifted. The tension drained out like a released tourniquet. The reporters whispered into phones, the board members conferred in low voices. Patel turned to me. Mrs. Hart, the hospital will issue a public apology and reinstate your award. You deserve better than what's been said about you. Thank you, I said, but I'm not here for the award. I reached into the nurse's kit one last time and pulled out the silver bracelet. Stay safe. The engraving caught the light, a perfect little scar. I placed it gently on the table. 10 years ago, I gave this to my daughter so she'd be safe, I said. Today, I'm keeping that promise, but for myself. Amber sobbed harder, whispering, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I touched her shoulder, light as gauze. Healing isn't sorry, Amber. It's change. She nodded through tears. I turned back to the board. I'm not pressing charges for myself. The evidence is yours. Do what you need to do. I'm done with transfusions, emotional or otherwise. Then I closed the nurse's kit. The sound echoed in the quiet hall like the final snap of gloves after surgery. Outside, the lobby was filled with light. The storm had passed overnight, leaving the floor slick with rain. I could see Dean through the glass doors, surrounded by officers, face red with fury and disbelief. The flash of police cameras glinted off the wet pavement, and for a second, it looked like tiny bursts of blood-red light. Amber stood beside me, trembling. What happens now? She asked. Now, I said, you learn to stand without transfusions. She nodded weakly. Can we someday talk? Someday, I said, when both of us stop bleeding. She looked down. I'll try. I know. She turned and walked away, shoulders shaking. For once, I didn't chase her. I stood alone for a long time. The hospital glass reflected my face, older, lined, but finally clean. Behind me, Martha came out of the elevator, smiling through tears. You did it, she said. You actually did it. I didn't do anything new, I said. Just applied the same rule I used to teach the interns. She tilted her head. Which one? When the patient's dying from the wrong IV, I said softly. You pull the line out. On the table inside the boardroom, the silver bracelet still lay where I'd left it. A single drop of blood, mine, from where the latch had nicked my palm, had smeared against the metal. Under the lights, it shone like a signature. I didn't take revenge, I said later, as reporters called out questions I didn't answer. I just pulled the IV out of a life that was feeding the wrong person. A year later, the city finally began to feel like mine again. The hospital moved on to new crises, new names, new scandals. The newspapers had long stopped calling. Dean's trial ended quietly. Plea deal, probation, no cameras. Amber divorced him, moved to Oregon, and sent me a card that said only 3 words. Still healing, Mom. I kept that card on the shelf next to my plants. It wasn't an apology. It didn't need to be. Healing isn't an apology. It's proof that something still grows after being cut. As for me, I didn't go back to nursing. Instead, I opened a small community class at the recreation center on Maple Avenue. A pale blue sign hung above the door. First Aid for the Heart. Instructor, Eleanor Hart, RN, retired. Inside, it smelled faintly of coffee and lavender. 10 folding chairs. A whiteboard. A circle of women, most older than 40, some widowed, some divorced, all carrying invisible injuries. We didn't talk about anatomy. We talked about survival. About how to apply pressure to a wound no one can see. How to stop emotional bleeding before it turns septic. How to breathe again when someone else has drained you dry. Give them simple things, grounding exercises, breathing through memory, writing down what hurts without judging it. Sometimes I caught myself using hospital phrases. Apply steady pressure, keep it clean, don't look away, and realized they worked just as well for the heart as for the body. On the wall behind me, framed in glass, hung my old nurse's kit. Not on a shelf, not hidden away, but displayed, open. Inside, it sat a brand new roll of gauze, still sealed in its paper wrap. When I hung it there, I told the class, This is where I keep the lesson I almost died to learn. They always asked what I meant, and I always smiled. Sometimes I'd say, the person who needs first aid most is the one holding the kit. That usually made them laugh softly, the kind of laugh that hurts a little because it's true. One afternoon, near the end of class, a new student raised her hand. She was young, late 20s maybe, wearing a wedding ring and a nervous smile. "Ms. Hart," she said, "can I ask something personal?" "Of course." She hesitated. Do you still donate blood?" The room went quiet. Even the ceiling fans seemed to pause. I looked at her and thought about how far I'd come from that hallway at St. Sain. Mary's, from the woman who once believed love meant endless transfusion. "Oh, yes," I said finally, "but only when people won't use it to hurt someone else." A few women nodded, understanding without me having to explain. I smiled and added, "Physical blood, emotional blood, it's the same rule. You can give what you have, but not what keeps you alive." After class, I stayed behind to tidy up. Sunlight slanted through the blinds, landing on the glass case that held the nurse's kit. The light caught the roll of gauze, turning it almost gold. Next to it, I placed a small silver plaque Martha had given me, for saving lives. And then, finally, your own. I ran my fingers over the engraving. My hands were older now, the skin thinner, the veins easier to see. I didn't hide them anymore. They were proof of circulation. Proof I was still here. But sometimes she didn't. We talked about the weather, her work, her therapy. She always ended with, "I'm okay." I always answered, "Good. Stay safe." The words meant something different now. They weren't a command or a promise, just a blessing, equal between us. In the evenings when the building emptied, I liked to sit alone in the quiet. The air held a kind of peace hospitals never have. The peace that comes after the emergency, after the cleanup, after you realize the worst has already happened and you survived it. I'd light a small candle and watch the flame flicker against the glass case. Every so often, I'd whisper to the woman I used to be. The one who waited by the phone, who confused forgiveness with surrender, who mistook bleeding for love. "You did your best," I'd tell her. "Now rest." And she did, because somewhere along the line, I'd stopped waiting for closure. I'd started stitching instead. Slow, careful, invisible seams that held everything together just enough to keep walking forward. One rainy afternoon, a student lingered after class. She was older. Gray hair pinned up, eyes rimmed with fatigue. She looked at the kit on the wall and said softly, "You must have saved so many people." "Some," I said, "but that's not what I'm proud of." She frowned. "Then what are you proud of?" I smiled. That I finally learned when to stop. She stared at me, confused at first, then nodded slowly, tears glinting in her eyes. "I think I'm still learning that." "Then you're exactly where you need to be," I said. When the last student left, I turned off the lights. The room fell into that soft, humming quiet I loved. The same kind of quiet that used to mean something was about to go wrong. Now, it meant everything was finally right. I stood by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, each droplet carving its own path. Outside, the city pulsed steady and bright, like a heart that had finally found its rhythm again. For years, I had given my blood to heal others. Now I understood what real healing looked like. It wasn't the transfusion. It was the clot, the choice to stop the flow before it killed you. Vermont greeted me with quiet, not the sterile quiet of a hospital corridor, but the kind that smells of rain and soil. The kind that belongs to life, not loss. I moved here 9 months after the trial. Martha helped me find the cabin, small, white, with wild daisies growing stubbornly through the cracks in the porch. The town was slow, the air clean, the people kind in that New England way. Polite, curious, distant enough to give you space to start over. Most mornings I woke before sunrise, brewed coffee, and sat by the window as the light crept across the hills. When the sun rose, it filled the cup in my hand with an amber glow. For years, I'd looked at that color and thought of blood. Now, it just looked like morning. I don't smell disinfectant on my hands anymore, I said once to Martha, who'd come to visit. Only earth. And freedom. She smiled. You've earned both. My days found their rhythm easily. I taught 2 classes a week at the community hall. First aid for the heart, the same workshop I'd started in the city, but slower now, more reflective. Women came from nearby towns. Teachers, nurses, widows, even a retired surgeon, all with their own kinds of bleeding. We sat in a circle under the skylight, sunlight pooling on the wooden floor, and talked about mending. Not the kind that hides scars, but the kind that lets them breathe. In the corner of the room, behind glass, hung my old nurse's kit. Inside was a roll of gauze, fresh, white, untouched. The students always asked about it. That, I'd say, isn't for wounds. It's for reminders. Reminders that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without reopening. Sometimes, after class, I'd walk with 1 or 2 of them to the farmer's market by the lake. We'd buy flowers, vegetables, stories. The vendors already knew me. The nurse with the garden hands. When summer came, I planted roses in the yard. Luz, of course. The first time I cut a bloom and placed it in water, I caught my reflection in the vase, red light staining my fingers. For a heartbeat, my body remembered the smell of iron, the weight of loss. But then the sun shifted, and the color changed. It wasn't blood. It was light. It was life reminding me that the same color can mean 2 opposite things, depending on who's holding it. I still wore the bracelet for a while. The silver one engraved, "Stay safe." The metal had dulled, but the words hadn't. One morning, as I sat by the window stringing dried herbs, I decided it was time to give it a new shape. I drove to a local silversmith and handed it to her. I'd like this melted down, I said. Turn it into a pendant, a teardrop, or maybe a drop of blood. Something honest. She studied me carefully. A drop of blood? I smiled. Don't worry, it's metaphorical now. 2 weeks later, she called me back. The pendant was simple, a small red-tinged drop of silver on a thin chain. When sunlight hit it, it glowed faintly, not with violence but with warmth. I slicked it around my neck. It rested against my collarbone, cool and steady. It didn't feel like grief anymore. It felt like vaccination. A little bit of the past, transformed into protection. Amber came to visit that autumn. She looked different, softer, quieter. She brought a bouquet of wildflowers and a photograph of us from years ago. Her graduation day, me in my scrubs, pride and exhaustion written all over my face. We sat on the porch with tea and long silences. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. I still don't understand how I didn't see it, she said. You weren't meant to, I replied. Some people build entire houses out of lies and call them homes. You just lived inside one. She blinked hard. Do you forgive me? I looked at the hills turning gold in the distance. Forgiveness isn't a switch, Amber. It's a slow clot. It stops the bleeding 1 heartbeat at a time. She nodded. And forgetting? Never, I said. Forgetting is how we get infected again. We didn't hug, not right away. We just sat there, listening to the wind move through the birches, a soft, constant sound, like breath returning after too long underwater. Before she left, she noticed the pendant around my neck. Is that? Yes, I said. It used to be the bracelet. She smiled sadly. It suits you better this way. Winter arrived early that year. Snow muffled everything, turning the world into a field of quiet light. I spent long evenings by the fire, reading, writing letters I didn't send, and teaching online once a week for a women's shelter. The class always began the same way, with a small ritual. I'd hold up the pendant and say, "This is what healing looks like." Not erasing, not hiding. Transforming. Forgiveness is just a vaccine made from your own history. The women would nod, some crying, some smiling. And I'd think, maybe this is what legacy looks like. Not awards, not plaques, not applause. Just knowledge passed on quietly, like sterile instruments handed to the next pair of hands. Sometimes I still woke from dreams of the hospital. Not nightmares, exactly. More like echoes. The hiss of oxygen, the steady beep of monitors, the scent of antiseptic. But in the dream, no one was dying. Everyone was simply resting. Even me. When I woke, I'd open the window to let in the cold air, and the smell of pine and frost would fill the room. It always chased away the ghosts. I'd touch the pendant at my throat and whisper, "Still safe." Martha visited in the spring. She'd retired officially and was traveling, uncharacteristically carefree. We sat in the garden, surrounded by roses. "You're really happy here," she said. "I am," I admitted. It took me 63 years to learn the simplest rule. Some wounds don't need reopening to prove they healed. She laughed. "You should put that on your brochure." "Maybe I will." She sipped her tea. "Do you ever miss the hospital?" I looked out over the garden. Rows of red, pink, white. "I miss the part where saving lives felt like purpose," I said, "but not the part where I forgot I had one of my own." She nodded. "So what do you call this stage of life?" "Oh," I said, "from everyone else's emergencies." The day she left, I walked to the lake at sunset. The water mirrored the sky, gold fading into crimson. I cupped my hands, caught a little, and watched it drip through my fingers. It looked like blood, but it wasn't. It was light. Finally, only light. I thought about all the years I spent mistaking sacrifice for love, forgiveness for duty, silence for peace. And I smiled, because now I knew the difference. At night, I sometimes sat on the porch steps, the pendant cool against my skin, and spoke softly into the darkness. Not prayers, not regrets, just acknowledgments. "I forgive," I'd whisper. But I didn't forget, because forgetting, I'd learned, is how infection spreads. Memory, painful as it is a kind of vaccine. A small dose of what once hurt you, strong enough to keep you immune. The stars above Vermont looked like scattered stitches, holding the sky together. And beneath them, for the first time, I felt whole. They asked me once, during an interview for a local women's network, if I would ever share my story on camera. I said no at first. Too many words had already been spoken for me, about me, against me. But a year later, standing in front of that small camera in my classroom, the afternoon light spilling over the old nurse's kit on the wall, I changed my mind. Because silence, I realized, can start bleeding too. The director counted down softly. 3, 2, 1. And I looked straight into the lens. "My name is Eleanor Hart," I began, voice calm, steady. I was a nurse for 35 years. I spent most of my life stopping other people's bleeding. And one day, I realized I'd forgotten how to stop my own. The studio was quiet. Only the soft hum of the lights, the faint smell of coffee from the hallway. I went on. "For years, I thought love meant giving without limit. Giving until you were empty, then finding ways to give more. I told myself that was kindness. But sometimes kindness is just self-harm with better PR. I let that sit for a moment. You could almost hear hearts shifting on the other side of the lens. One day, I said, the people I'd given everything to, my time, my savings, my trust, came back and asked for something I couldn't survive giving. Literally. I smiled, small and unflinching, and for the first time in my life, I said no. The words felt like a release. They called it cruelty, but I called it recovery. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes steady. So if one day the same people who drained you come back asking for more, for forgiveness, for energy, for your blood, ask yourself, do I still owe them what nearly killed me? A pause. Because maybe the bravest thing you'll ever do is keep something for yourself. The crew didn't move. Even the camera operator had tears in her eyes. I forgive them, I said softly. But I don't forget. Because forgetting is how the infection spreads again. Memory, painful as it is. That's our vaccine. It keeps us immune to the same kind of hurt. I gestured slightly toward the nurse's kit on the wall behind me. In that box, I used to keep bandages for everyone else. Now it holds one clean roll of gauze, for me. Because sometimes the person worth saving is the one who finally stops the bleeding. I smiled, not sadly, but with the kind of peace that comes only after the wound has closed. So if you're watching this, I said, and you've ever been told that saying no makes you selfish, remember, Lady Saul isn't cruelty. It's survival. Another pause. I wanted the words to breathe. We grow up thinking the purest love is unconditional. But real love, the kind that lasts, needs boundaries. Even blood has a limit before the heart stops beating. I glanced down at the pendant resting against my chest, the melted silver drop, gleaming softly under the lights. This, I said, touching it lightly, used to be a bracelet that said, "Stay safe." Now I wear it again. Reshaped, reclaimed. Because safety isn't what people give you. It's what you decide to keep. Then, I looked directly into the lens, voice low but firm. If one day, someone who once drained you dry comes back asking for your blood, will you have the courage to keep it for yourself? I let the question hang. Somewhere beyond that lens, I wanted one woman, maybe sitting alone in her kitchen, maybe still shaking from her own version of my story, to feel the permission I'd waited a lifetime for. Share this story, I said. Not for me. But so another woman out there will understand that not giving any more doesn't make her heartless. It makes her alive. The director made the silent gesture. Wrap up. But I wasn't done yet. I leaned closer, voice almost a whisper. I used to save people with my blood, I said. Now, I save myself by not bleeding for the wrong ones. Then I straightened, looked into the camera one last time, and smiled. My story ends here. But maybe, just maybe, this is the first drop of freedom in yours.